This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for joining us on this week's NC Spin. We've got an interesting show for you that begins with confusion and indecision by our State Board of Elections over voting machines and election security. Next, we ask whether marijuana and smokable hemp should be put in the same pot. Oh, that's really a bad pun. We also talk about the latest holdup on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and wonder if this is going to ever be built. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of our panel, this week we have Bev Perdue, former governor of North Carolina, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Chris Fitzsimon, the director of the Newsroom, and Rick Henderson, editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. And we'll begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Let's get started. In just 7 months, we'll be asked to vote in the 2020 primary elections, but before we can mark our ballots, there are many questions that need answering. Will there be a new process for drawing districts and new districts in place? Will we have fixed voter fraud problems? And will we have made improvements to ensure our elections are safe? Let's start with the indecision and missteps by the State Board of Elections over choosing new voting machines. Bev Perdue, this process has become more complicated, but partially because the chair had to resign over an inappropriate joke that he told. Now the governor had chosen a replacement. You went through that process of choosing members of the State Board of Elections. What are the criteria you used in selecting members?
I think the best criteria that you can use is that somebody has real integrity and that it's a bipartisan appointment, because the Board of Elections is actually as important as any board in North Carolina. The vote, our individual vote, is the most powerful thing we have. And I think the reason you saw the fallout from the Board of Elections is that with all the national and international scrutiny, people who run elections are very aware of the need to perform perfectly.
And everybody's watching them now.
They are watching them.
I mean, you're right. It used to be one of those positions where you just sort of took it for granted, but they're all watching them now. So Damon Sircosta has been appointed to fulfill the complement. They've still to elect a new chair, but we've got 3 Dems and 2 Republicans, which is the way the law says. The big debate is over whether we should have election machines that have hand-written ballots, hand-marked ballots, or bar-coded ballots. Now, the board's been going back and forth. What's all the indecision about?
Well, part of it is whether or not the barcodes really are readable and are actually discernible in the same way that a hand-marked ballot would be. Technology has gotten a lot better over the years. It was the scanning technology of 20 years ago, which is what a lot of people seem to be still worried about, was much inferior to what we have right now. But it's very important, I think, for voters to be confident that what the ballot they're casting is actually the ballot that's going to be counted. And so that's why these touchscreen devices have gotten in some disarray and also have not gotten the respect that others have. 30 North Carolina counties approximately use those touchscreen machines, and it may well be with only one vendor certified to provide those machines, it's possible that they just could be kicked out entirely.
We've had problems with hacking concerning those machines before, have we?
Well, we have, and we've had problems across the country. The Florida Senate race was famous. Ben Nelson, the incumbent Florida senator, went on and said that the Russians had been accessing Florida data online, and his opponent, Rick Scott, ridiculed him. It was a huge issue in the campaign. Well, then it turns out, we found out a few months ago that it was actually true. that Russians had gotten into the machines. Now, we don't know what they did or if they affected the election, but there are two real issues. One is a paper trail so people can have confidence in the actual ballot, and the second one is cybersecurity, not just for the election, but for the voter registration data. There's all sorts of ways people could tinker with that, remove people from the rolls, change the registration, do all sorts of things. Both of those are incredibly important.
And John, it sort of begs the question, should all 100 counties be using the same machine, the same way? We've given them options before. We've had the hand ballots and the barcodes. Should it all be one? Should it all be one vendor?
I don't think so. I think that you could have standards, you can have minimum standards that are statewide, but the machines are at different maturities. Some of them are older than others. Some counties are quite different from others in terms of population and dispersal, and I'm not convinced that that is necessary. And when you go to all the 100 counties all have the same machine from the same vendor, then you reduce the advantages that come from having different communities try different things out and have these processes evolve over time.
But if you're using the same vendor and one county has a machine that breaks down during the middle of an election, I mean, you can go to another county and can. Bev, there was a bill that was introduced in the House this past week on Thursday, which seems to be getting some traction over there. And one of the things that they've said was, as we did in 2016 or 2018, we're going to kick the can down the road again, and we're going to allow those 30 counties that have these touch screen machines to use them again through 2020. Before we require a particular process be used. Do you like that? That idea?
That's not the right answer. The right answer is for the state to augment the financing for those individual counties and force them to pick something other than a touch screen. I think all of us have used a touch screen. I used one in Craven, understands how hard it is to be sure that your vote is counted. Yeah. For years, I've thought you should have a receipt, a copy, somehow a duplicate of the ballot you cast individually.
Well, the hand ballot that you have to fill in, I mean, you get a double dose of being able to do that. Another thing, Rick, that they were working on is absentee ballots, right, because we all know what happened in the 9th District so far as absentee ballot fraud. And truthfully, isn't that where we should be more worried about voter fraud than at the poll itself?
Yeah, I think that everyone who's looked at the issue with any credibility knows that the absentee ballot process is the easiest to cause security issues, fraud issues, and the like. And it looks like they're moving towards some methods to prevent or at least make it a lot harder to do ballot harvesting. One of them would be that the form for applying for an absentee ballot will be different every election so that you can't just simply stockpile them and reuse them. When I was working in Nevada, they would have basically pads of absentee ballot application forms that they would hand out to different groups to distribute. It's a real invitation for fraud.
The one concern I have about that, I don't disagree with that at all, but we have been in session for a long time. We've had sessions that have adjourned for weeks at a time with nothing happening. This is a serious issue. We've known about it for a long time. We certainly knew about it in the primary, which has started this whole controversy. I wish we had had longer hearings, had some testimony, had some thoughtful debate. It may end up being fine, but this is an example of something. The legislature should have been talking about this for months, not when we think the session might end, the Senate might go home, we don't know what's happening.
Well, the Senate has already acted on this. David Lewis is the House chair for this. And one of the things that he's inserted in this new bill, John, is that they're going to allow postage paid envelopes for your absentee ballot. They're going to allocate $250,000 as a test project to start off with. You like that idea?
I like testing ideas. So I'd like to learn more about how that works in practice and what the problem is that they're trying to solve and whether this reasonably addresses it. I like that this is a good example. Chris points to a process question about should the bill have come out earlier, should there have been more hearings? I understand that argument. This is another case where it's better to test something out rather than just mandate it
statewide, and then you got to go back and changing laws. And Bev, one of the other things that they're talking about is that for the first time this year, the photo ID it has to be involved in an absentee ballot. Now the question is, do you enclose the photo ID when you request the ballot, or do you enclose the photo ID when you mail the completed ballot, or do you do both? What do you think?
I think you do both. I've used the
So everybody's got to go out and buy a copy machine?
No, you just go to your local vendor and get a copy machine, a copy or for 10 cents a page, Tom. Yeah, there should be security with our elections, and that's going to mandate all of us show an ID, and as much as we need to show it, we should, because we want our elections to be pure.
Well, are we going to get pushback from this, having to make a copy and so forth like that, saying that you're actually impeding people's rights to be able to vote easily and making it more difficult for them?
Well, of course you are, but then again, it's in the state constitution, so they have to have some sort of form of making the voter ID accessible and available. And as for the postage issue, one of the things that was issued as a concern was there are an awful lot of people under the age of 30 who basically never use a stamp for anything. And so the idea for providing
how does this thing work?
Right, exactly. And believe it or not, that's something that I've heard from elections officials.
I want to switch over just to make a little bit of a transition here, because the thing that really keyed this voter absentee ballot voter fraud was the 9th district. And we had 7 people indicted this past week, turned themselves in so far as the voter fraud was concerned, McCrae Dallas and a number of other people. Are they going to throw the book at them, John? Is this going to be a test case?
I suspect there will be a lot of pleas. I'm not sure we go to a trial, which is really essentially a sort of another trial, the one that's already occurred in public. I'm not saying they'll all plead. I'm not saying there wouldn't be some resistance, but I think that most of these things will end up in plea bargains.
And so far as it goes, the State Board of Elections sort of planted a little thought in there. There may be some more indictments coming here. Does that mean the 9th district or other districts, or do we even know? Does anybody know?
Oh, I know, but I choose to keep it a secret for now.
This falls in the same category with the emus.
Absolutely.
Which I'm sure we'll probably hear about later on. But this September 10th election in the 9th district is really getting interesting. The polls show that it's kind of neck and neck between the two Dans, Bishop and McCready. McCready's raised more money, but the GOP just came in and is going to dump $1,600,000 into a television advertising buy between now and the election. Are they just trying to buy the election?
There'll be more outside money than that, and that'll clearly be, I think, one of the determining factors. The second one, this is a Republican district. I think we sort of lost track of that in the whole. McCready did very well in the initial race, and he may well win. I'm not saying he won't, but the expectations are people are acting like, oh, I think Bishop might win. Bishop is supposed to win. That's the way the maps were drawn. Now, McCready might win. I think this is very close. But I think we sort of lost track of the fact that this is a gerrymandered district. It happens to be the only one that's sort of within the margin of error, and that's why we're talking about it.
The Dems think they can flip this district, don't they, Bev?
I hope so.
Not to be partisan or anything like that. Any predictions on the race? I'll go around the table real quick.
I think that McCready has a shot to win it simply because, for one thing, this is going to be such an important race for the Dems to take this Republican seat if they can. And secondly, whoever
pull out all the stuff.
Whoever gets elected is going to have a leg up in 2020, and that race starts almost immediately.
Yeah, they got to turn around and run again. Yeah. John?
I think Dan Bishop will probably win the race.
All right. Bev?
It's a toss-up to me. My problem remains the money. All the money that comes in, the dark money, the public money, it's a sin in America.
Yeah.
I'm a little fascinated. Bishop has certainly tried to nationalize this and paint McCready as some tool of AOC and all that, but Donald Trump has not had a very good week or two. If that continues, that cannot be helpful to Dan Bishop, who's cozying up to him as much as he can.
Interesting. Let's change subjects. Farmers have started harvesting summer crops. They're pretty well through with tobacco and some of the other ones. But as always, some uncertainty about late season weather and prices and buyers is evident. And typically the Farm Bill in our legislature is passed with little controversy, but not so this year. This year there are questions about tariffs and how they might impact markets. And forgive the really bad pun, but lawmakers are asking whether marijuana and smokable hemp should be put in the same pot. Well, the status of smokable hemp's creating big divisions among farmers. Rick Henderson, North Carolina has allowed experiments by farmers in growing hemp. We're now 5th in the nation with some 1,300 farmers growing the crop. Should smokable hemp be labeled as a controlled substance?
Well, the General Assembly is looking at that right now. The federal government has said it's not. And smokable hemp or industrial grade hemp has a lower level of the hallucinogenic component that makes marijuana that gets people high when they smoke or ingest marijuana. So there are standards to make sure that hemp products in general, especially ones that you can consume, are of a low enough content that they will not get you high. Industrial hemp is a very profitable also product, because we've published a profile of a hemp farmer this week in Carolina Journal, a former tobacco farmer who grows a little bit of tobacco still, but he says he can get $30 a pound for industrial grade hemp when tobacco is going for about $2 a pound. And it also turns out that the curing barns and all the processes that are used, everything for tobacco works very, very well for hemp. And so North Carolina, if it gets this right, could actually be the nation's leader in producing industrial hemp.
And Bev, we need to, in full disclosure, we need to reveal the fact that your son is involved in a company, is a principal in a company that is working with CBD oil and the products that come from hemp. Smokable hemp has so much less THC. Don't ask me how to pronounce all those initials and what it means, but it's a booming industry now. They're using it as a painkiller, as other medicinal purposes. If we prohibited this smokable hemp and CBD from being produced here, would we essentially be putting out a sign saying North Carolina's out of business?
It would be the same sign if you said that for tobacco. It's really important, I believe, that we allow the private sector industries to work. And again, it's not because of my son, it's because I've always believed this. I think the less government regulation we have, the better. We tried to regulate alcohol at one point in time and realized the country couldn't regulate it. It was still a black market product, and we opened it up federally. We've tried to...
and we're still having debates about that, by the way.
Somebody is selling marijuana with not the prohibition.
And that's the big problem.
The money's there.
Isn't that the big problem, John? Aren't we really, I mean, this whole issue really comes down to people being afraid that this is a slippery slope, and the next step is if we legalize and we embrace smokable hemp, the next step is legalizing marijuana.
Well, I mean, I appreciate what Governor Perdue said about less government regulation. I think we should issue a joint statement on this subject because part of the objection that some have is, of course, hallucinogenic marijuana is illegal. How do you tell the difference? There's been some arguments from some law enforcement folks that they're concerned about how to enforce one set of laws if hemp is legal or smokable hemp is legal. I'm not really persuaded by the argument, but like a lot of arguments, you should take it seriously and think about it and figure out what the right remedies are.
We got an interesting situation going on here. We got Brent Jackson and Jimmy Dixon, two of the biggest advocates for agriculture in North Carolina, who normally are leading the charge for a farm bill, and they're on opposite sides of this thing. What's your prediction of what's going to happen?
I'm worried what's going to happen. What should happen is we should allow farmers to grow this, and I actually think it's a separate topic. 10 years from now, 5 years from now, I hope we'll have medicinal marijuana in North Carolina. It can ease a lot of suffering. It's legal in a lot of states, and we have to talk about why we're putting people in prison for having a marijuana, a joint or whatever. That's a whole other discussion. I'm worried that all that, however, as you mentioned, is infecting or is messing this conversation up. Clearly, we should allow farmers to grow this.
And this is a big economic factor, as you said early on in this discussion. The farmers are already hurting. They've had about 15 years, frankly, of bad economics. But the tariffs that have been imposed in these trade wars are really hurting them, particularly in soybeans, cotton,
tobacco,
hogs, so forth like that. North Carolina farmers got $105 million in aid from the federal government. Some people, Rick, are saying this is just a bailout, a federal bailout here. The farmers are saying, nope, it's not even helping make them whole. Right. It's just helping them pay their banks and suppliers and so forth like that. Which do you think?
Well, I think what's also going to happen too, I mean, I think it's not a bailout to the extent that it's making them whole. That is correct. But what's going to happen is with the latest round of potential tariffs that are coming forward from China, that may well kill our tobacco market entirely, because tobacco farmers will not qualify for any sort of assistance if indeed we have tariffs that hurt that industry. They cannot apply for federal relief in this case, so they're completely shut out.
Well, and these new tariffs that are coming along the line in September are going to cripple an already hurting industry. Now, the curious part about this, Bev, is that you talk to farmers. You've got a hound down in Craven County. You're talking to farmers all the time. They are just really upset about what these tariffs are doing to them, but they're still supporting President Trump.
They are, and that's just the biggest anomaly in the world. They really are going to be upset, though. I mean, you see a smile on some of the farmers because of the hemp opportunity, but now with the new tariffs, they're scared to death again. You know, this can bankrupt a lot of farms in eastern North Carolina, and that's a shame because none of it needs to happen.
And we've got about 10,000 farms, as I understand it, in North Carolina. Chris, I'm trying to think of Rick in a second. Larry Wooten with the North Carolina Farm Bureau is talking about farmers. He says President Trump calls farmers patriots, but he says a broke patriot ain't very good.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the politics of this are interesting. Obviously, the farmers are suffering. This is making their suffering much worse. But I have been interested. A lot of politicians who represent the farmers in President Trump's party have not vocally come out and oppose this and taken a stand. This is what place where they could literally represent. They ought to be representing the farmers, not their political interests.
Okay, so we're not just crying wolf here, I don't think. Mike Walden recently did an interview on WRAL, and he said he didn't see any recession in the forecast for North Carolina's future, but threatened that maybe these trade wars might have that impact. As the Fed chair representative in Charlotte said, inflationary periods don't die, they're murdered. And things like a trade war could very easily do that, couldn't it?
Tariffs are taxes. Trade restrictions are government regulations. Conservatives ought to be against excessive taxes and regulations because they might lead to recession. It's another way of putting the same thing.
And you and Bev can have your party agreeing with each other. But let me move on. Nobody thought it was going to be easy to build a 600-mile natural gas pipeline from West Virginia to North Carolina, but the economic benefits appeared to be worth the fight. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approved the project in 2017. Now, in the 2 years since it's been approved, there have been all kinds of controversies and protests and some progress. John, in late July, the U.S. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ignored the Endangered Species Act when it approved the pipeline, and once again, the project is on hold. Is this just a hiccup, or is the project in danger?
Well, there are two threats, and that's one of them. It's not quite that the argument is they ignored it, it's that they didn't apply it properly, is what the Fourth Circuit said. But the Fourth Circuit also interrupted the pipeline on a different matter about crossing the Appalachian Trail,
Yes.
or which federal agency is authorized for that. I think both of these things, or one of these things, something will get to the Supreme Court. The Fourth Circuit is simply not a friendly place for the power companies or people who want natural gas. Every argument the environmentalists make, they lap up. So I think the U.S. Supreme Court is the solution here.
Is there a greater good to bringing natural gas into our state, particularly the eastern part of it?
There is, but we have to do it in the right way. I think that the power companies have not gone about this in the right way, and they're paying the price, and it's going to be a long time.
Interesting.
They still think they can get it done by 2021, but they're going to need a favorable judicial outcome.
And Rick, Governor Cooper has been all embroiled in this Atlantic Coast Pipeline issues. Have those issues straightened out any, or is there still controversy surrounding the governor?
There's still controversy surrounding the governor. It's died down quite a bit, but we'll have to see if the General Assembly actually moves forward in any kind of investigation.
Before I ask the panel to tell us something we don't know, I need to tell you who watch NC Spin on Sundays on UNC TV that next week our program is being preempted for UNC TV fundraising. Next Sunday, the airing of the program will be at 5:30 a.m. So either get up early or set your DVR recorders so you can watch us. And you can also watch by logging on ncspin.com and watching our YouTube broadcast. And by the way, this doesn't affect our Friday night broadcast next week at all, and we thank you for your understanding. Now, John Hood, I got 2 minutes. Tell us something we don't know.
All right, so we're all concerned about bridging political divides. I just want to make people feel better by recognizing that in 2012 we have two strong factions in the legislature fighting. Then that noted peacemaker Tom Goolsbee stepped forward and addressed and fixed the problem, and we now have an official Liver Mush Festival in the spring in Marion and a fall Liver Mush Festival in Shelby. See, we can solve problems.
And we were worried about emus. Bev Perdue, tell us something we don't know.
In 10 days, you're going to see yellow school buses again all over the state.
Man.
And those yellow school buses means that about 1.5 million little kids, about 100,000 teachers, and 2,500 school buildings are coming back to school.
Drive like your children are on those buses.
The bigger and more important question is, are those schools safe?
Yeah. Rick, tell us something we don't know.
As part of the school issue, part of the new curriculum is going to be dealing with financial training for students. They're going to have to learn financial literacy, and the funding for that is held up in the budget battle right
Chris.
now.
Interesting that Joe Biden is leading polls in North Carolina. So very early in the Democratic primary, but the leading fundraiser from North Carolina is Pete Buttigieg, which I think would surprise a lot of people.
Interesting. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter. Give your feedback and read my weekly column. Visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And while there, subscribe to our NC Spin podcast or the NC Spin YouTube broadcast. And join us next week for more balanced debate on the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
From treating the newest member of your family to helping a loved one make end-of-life decisions, your family physician is with you every step, for every stage of life, for every member of your family. Despite a healthcare landscape fraught with potential landmines, family physicians across North Carolina are providing you a lifetime of committed, dependable medical care. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.